Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Virtual Coffee Morning number 11. Glad to see you all here today on a very rainy Thursday morning. We're coming from a couple of locations this morning, so I think many of you will probably now recognize my kitchen, which I now seem to spend my entire life stood in the corner of talking into this screen. David, who's joining me, is joining me from an actual office, like a real business person. He is in Future Space, the entrepreneurship hub up in the north of the city on the UE campus. In fact, in the building behind the Nightingale Hospital. Which is empty, I understand. I don't think it's beautiful, but it's great that it's there anyway. So as always, the coffee mornings, what we'll do this morning is we'll have a broad chat about the experiences and story of what it's like to be an entrepreneur and a founder, and how to drill down for some useful tips for everybody out there. If people have questions, please do drop them in the chat outside, whether they're questions just about more broad entrepreneurship and what it's like building a business, or whether it's a bit more specific on Esoterix and mobility on demand and the type of activity that the team are doing there. I won't talk much more other than to say it's great to have you all here today. So, David, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit of your story and a bit of who Esoterix are as well?
Yeah, okay. Hi, I'm David Stewart. I'm CEO of Esoterix, which is a mobility-based startup. Well, startup. Still think of it as a startup, but we've actually been going a few years now, based in Bristol. We're very much about trying to improve transport in a couple of directions. Socially, we're interested in providing more affordable and accessible transport to people. So transport poverty is a phrase which is often used about people who suffer from a lack of transport. Could it be access to jobs, access to health services? And I think the problems around social isolation is also now beginning to be better understood. And there's also an environmental angle to that, in that we believe that shared transport is the kind of answer to making it accessible and affordable. And obviously shared transport would in theory take some vehicles off the road, and therefore help us move towards our climate change goals, which we mustn't forget in the current circumstances still exist. Yeah, so I call us a startup. Actually, we've been going since about 2012. We basically got born out of the idea about what we could do with these things when they appeared, mobile phones, in transport, how we become much more responsive, much more user-focused type service. We started around the same time as Uber. Obviously, we've gone in slightly different directions and grown at slightly different rates than Uber. But it was that idea. It's about using technology to improve transport services.
Cool, thanks for that. And yeah, there's pros and cons about being an Uber. I'm not sure. It would be nice to have all that money, but I'm not entirely sure it's been made in the most ethical way. So when you set up the business and where the business came from, was that very much in the sense of you've always been entrepreneurial, you've always thought about setting up businesses, and this is a thing you've done all your life? Was it you saw an opportunity, or was it that you saw a problem and thought, do you know what, we can sort this, we can get this done?
Yeah, I think it was more the latter. So yeah, I wouldn't say I'm a born entrepreneur by any means. I mean, my background is maths. And going in, then using tech and computing to do things around artificial intelligence and machine learning. So I just loved doing that stuff for a while. and using that as a passport, really, to go and work in different industries, to apply those sort of techniques in different spaces. You know, aviation, consumer electronics, defense, all sorts of different things. But I think it was when, I started thinking about transport a bit and not really understanding how it was meant to work. I would see these buses wandering around half empty. Meanwhile, I was doing projects about optimizing the transit of data packages across networks. And I was thinking, you know, we can solve networking problems in technology and electronic sense, but why is it so broken in the human sense? So it was really I took an opportunity to try and do something there. Put a speculative bid into Innovate UK. Actually, was how we kickstarted the project and managed to get that time and a little bit of funding to kick things going back at that time.
Cool. So that's interesting. It's very much you saw your experience and you saw where you'd come from, and you could see you could apply something that's a bit more algorithmic, I guess, into a real world experience and say, what going on with this?
Yeah. I mean, there was certainly a temptation because my kids were quite young then to be able to explain what I did as well. So that was nice to set it in a context they understood. Buses they understand. Data packets across Wi-Fi networks less so. So that was useful. But I think it's also because I'd done the mathsy stuff and I really like complex problems, or what I thought as complex, hard problems. I actually came to realize that the hardest problems have those kind of soft edges to them. It's the soft systems, it's the people, and how users want to use stuff, which is actually the hardest bit of probably technology. So as I got more and more interested in that side of things, I got more interested in the sort of business application of technology. And that's where I began to think about how I could maybe use what I know to try and improve stuff more visibly in the real world.
Cool. And I guess that sort of neatly into my next question, which is, now you've been a founder as well as working for a number of other organizations, what is the best thing about that? Is that piece of having an impact or being able to explain to your children what your job is? Like, anybody can summarize my job to a point where I can explain it to my mum, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely part of it. But no, the best bit is being able to actually fully focus your energy on something which you believe in, I guess. So it's being able to set that business direction, the business strategy, and that's really quite liberating at first. Then it comes with its challenges as well, because then you suddenly realize there's a huge responsibility there on you, particularly when you start making your first hires, etc. You know, you have all that to take into consideration as well, and you realize how important the decisions you're making and the way you're going to go go. But yeah, I think it's liberation. I think it's a fantastic learning experience as well.
And is it something, you know, now you've done that for a few years, if you were talking to someone that was thinking about leaving a corporate role, is it something where, do you think it is a mindset? Is it something that's built in? Is it something that you can learn?
Oh yeah. I think you can definitely learn. I think yes, definitely. I mean, I think the financial challenges are there. I think you shouldn't shy away from that. You know, various times I've had to, never giving up of trying to do what I was trying to do. I've had to pay the bills in other ways. You know, I was a postman for a year or so, which is a fantastic job because you're back home at your desk at lunchtime and you've got the rest of the day to do stuff on developing your business. So there are challenges, but I think as long as you believe in your idea and you can validate that idea to some extent with people around you. So I think pitching your idea just to friends and family a lot. You know, as you mentioned, you know, if you can explain to your mum or your grandmother what you do, then and they understand it, then that's probably shows you're on the right track. If you can't do that, then you should think about pivoting or not be afraid, because sometimes it is the brave thing to do, is to stop and change and do something else. Yeah,
and I think it's really interesting, that piece of, well, both how you cope with the finances, because I think there is always a challenge with entrepreneurship that if you're financially secure, it's easier to go into this. I've never heard anyone suggest you become a postman. I think that's an amazing, you know, get out, pressure, lots of exercise, and have a full day ahead of you at the end.
Keeps you fit as well. So
and I think that piece of being able to pitch to your friends and family and explain is something that's really, really key. One of the programs that we help run, we do an event series called Pitch Me, which my colleagues Bryony and Abby run. And that's very much about allowing founders, early stage founders mainly, to pitch their business idea to an audience of people that don't know them, but in the nicest possible way, aren't investors. So you only get one chance at first impression, don't you? So that idea of being able to explain, and it has been, I've participated in a few of them, and it's surprising how often, as people who are very passionate about an idea, we can go into not being able to see the wood for the trees, and we forget to explain the real basics, and quite often we forget to explain the value of why this is a good idea, because we just assume everybody is on the same page as us. So I think, the more you can do that, the more you can simplify it, the better. Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, pitching to people, explaining your idea, because you learn from what you're saying as well, strange though it may seem, but you do tend to get a bit of group think in your head if you're not too careful. And when you're actually pitching, you're understanding what you're saying, it may come out slightly different than what you expected. And I think that's a really important learning experience as well.
And in terms of if we think about those early days, and maybe some later days, when you were doing the postal work, and you were setting up, were there any times where you thought, you know what, no, I'm good for this. This is more than I need to do. I'm going to quit.
No, I never did. I was stubborn. That would be one word for it. Or maybe not brave enough to quit. But no, I always thought it would happen eventually. It hasn't quite happened how I expected, and I think there is, with any new ideas, there's always stuff there already, and maybe this was kind of, didn't know a lot about transport when I started up the company, so I didn't really understand how the business works and the market dynamics. So you have a great idea, but then you also have to learn how that can fit in to the market, how you can make progress as a business. So the journey has been interesting, and the destination is slightly different, but I always believed that the fundamental idea was good for it.
And in terms of that resilience, I guess, do you have any tips or advice for other people? I guess knowing that your idea fundamentally stacks up is always valuable. But whether there's anything else, and I'm terrible for this because I have a very northern man attitude of, well, you just get on with it, which isn't particularly helpful for other people.
No, actually, we really like that attitude. So we decided to just get on with it several times, so to speak. And in fact, now we have bravery as one of our values, which sounds a bit self-congratulatory, but it's, we're a tech company, and we were making stuff which we thought would enable better transport services, but the market wasn't quite ready for them. The market's not set up in that way. Then actually it's unclear what entities, if any, are interested in improving bus transport in the marketplace. So So we thought, well, we'll have to do it. So we started our own services, so I think you do just sometimes have to just get on with it, make a noise. We didn't know then, we thought we were just doing some small stuff in Bristol, but all of a sudden we found out that everybody was watching us and we're making, headlines in the industry press. So, that's one way. You get on with it, make a splash. I think is the best way to approach it.
And it's interesting, that piece of, I think we're all bad at realizing sometimes what impact that we're having outside of our immediate thing and who else can see what we're doing. And it's really easy to fall into well, nobody cares about this apart from me. And that's very rarely the case. So I guess touching on your values as an organization and where you've come from, you're quite a tight team. How have you built up that team? Where did that come from the off, or has that developed over time?
No, it has developed over time. I was very lucky to have a co-founder very early on. And that really helps because that gives you some confidence that you're not totally mad, particularly in the early days when it can be quite lonely if you're trying to do it as a one person thing. And then we very much it's a balance, but we've managed to grow a team where we actually agree in and actually review and adjust the three evils of vision, mission, and values are current, and we're all on side with that. I mean, a lot of companies will struggle to actually define their vision and mission and values, and really everybody believe in them. But we managed to build a team which are full scale behind them, and I think that it's not been easy, and it has taken us a few years, but I think we're really seeing the benefit of that now.
Yeah. And that, I guess, has allowed you to build something which is, sorry, there's a cat that's very...
Yeah, I wondered what it was.
she's very interested. I think mainly in the fact that the dreamies are next to me, but it might be what we're saying as well. So in terms of where you built up with that team, and that's taken time, and as you say, having co-founders makes a big difference. If we look at it from the other side, I guess, of the industries that you're going into, like you're going into an industry which I wouldn't say traditionally has been disrupted, but you're trying to disrupt. And how has that been? Because I think there's lots of businesses and people that we're working with who are now in industries that are being disrupted. So having people who have that long-term experience is always really interesting to hear.
Yes, technology is moving very fast, isn't it? I mean, disruptions brings opportunities, really. I mean, having worked in some larger companies as well, they are very unable to adapt in many cases. They have systems and processes which are difficult to respond to. So really it is the entrepreneurial space which can take advantage of disruption and create disruption. Yeah, I mean, transport is slightly difficult because it's a sort of industry which traditionally has worked on sort of very long-term contracts of taking years, and we sometimes get, and our business model has to somehow reflect that as well, that not everybody's going to switch to a different form of operation tomorrow. So when we're, for instance, we're looking for investment, then I think our return on investment for an investor tends to be slightly longer than they would prefer to see from other tech startups. But because transport is so huge, I think that they're accepting of that, or at least some of them are. So,
and I guess it's a huge market, and it's a long-term market. So you can see that if you can start building up revenue, there's activity there in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's 10% of GDP transport. So, it's big. You can see technology beginning to merge bits which were disparate. For example, freight and people, I think, is going to come together inevitably. Mm-hmm. So there's going to be a lot happening in the space. We've got a very strong aerospace industry in Bristol, for example. So there's lots of talk about air traffic, at least for freight originally. But, you know, there's some ideas about people transport there already coming into the space. So, yeah, I mean, it's exciting times. Again, it kind of looks slightly daunting, the amount of disruption. So I think what we do is we tend to try and revisit our value proposition every now and again, and we try and look back at, say, is it still valid? Are we still delivering this valid, this value? And we also ask the question about, well, actually, is it easier for someone else to do that now as well? So how unique are we as well? And do we need to freshen it up?
Yeah.
Because big industry, lots of revenue, perhaps not a lot of profit, but a lot of revenue. So there's a lot of competition.
Cool. And in terms of COVID, because, you know, it wouldn't be a conversation without COVID.
Of course.
How has that impacted? Has that changed what people are doing? Are people now thinking into the future? Because transport is an industry that, whether that's around revenues for things like aerospace, or whether, you know, if you're looking at more local point-to-point stuff, there's a whole set of implications there all of a sudden, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, it's been very strange having been part of what we thought was a movement towards encouraging people to use shared transport, public transport, to have everyone say, don't use shared transport or public transport. It has been quite disconcerting. But I think disruption is normally good, and there's, as before, there's opportunities coming out of it. So, I mean, one of the projects we're going to be doing over the next year or so involves providing more affordable rail travel for people who maybe don't commute every day of the week, but commute 2, 3 or 4 times. And now that has become a lot more pertinent, as people expect that people maybe will work more flexibly after COVID, and maybe people won't be commuting those 5 days a week anymore. So that's a positive outcome, in that we can hopefully push through some changes which support people who weren't particularly well supported before, part-time workers, flexible workers, you know, a lot of whom may have been women. There are a lot of women who tend to work in that way, so they were being adversely affected by the lack of affordable ticketing in many ways. So
it's really interesting in the sense of, with public transport in particular, if people are the people who would normally not be impacted, if they're now impacted and have the same challenges of more diverse groups, that's sort of suddenly driving a set of disruption and activity that you probably, I assume, been pushing for a while, but you're suddenly pushing against an open door.
Yeah, I think so. It's again that idea of serving users or passengers better, which has not always been top of the list in transport. Transport, it seems to be one of the last industries with the build it and they will come sort of attitude. So, for example, a rail company or a bus company doesn't traditionally know how many people are on their buses. They don't particularly mind. And so we've all seen bus stops where the bus sails past because it's full, for example. But the bus company wouldn't know that has happened. So there's no actual way to respond to that and maybe put on like extra services and stuff. So now they're proactively looking at estimating how many numbers are on their buses because of COVID, but that should be a driver for helping to improve services in general going forwards.
It's an interesting, it always amazes me when we talk about some of these industries, and so many of them, people explain things and I think, surely this is not the case. But it really is the case. So yeah. I just live in a bubble where everybody uses tech for everything.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a rail, sometimes you see the guard, for instance, going through the corridor and he's clicking. And he's literally counting how many people on the train, doing a spot check. You know, that's the level of some of our estimation of how busy trains are, for example.
Great. So I guess the final question from me, and it's something that I ask everybody, and irritatingly, everybody pretty much gives me the same answer. But I guess it means that it stands up. It's not just me saying it. What is it that you think makes the Bristol and Bath tech community stand out?
Oh, okay. I think it's very buzzy. I really do. Having lived in other parts of the UK, I mean, there is a lot going on in the bits I know about, and I certainly don't know about all of it. So there's special interest groups, which I'm particularly interested in on the sort of AI machine learning side. And then there's forums like TechSPARK or the other ones, the other groups, which I could mention, all providing forums for people to get together and network. And that's really important at all levels. So we encourage everybody in our company to attend events, because either they're tech focused or they're more business focused, then there seems to be a forum there. So the general tech hub is really good. And actually, from a sort of domain perspective, in terms of transport and mobility, this is also quite a good region. So there's about 35, 40 mobility organisations in the west of England area. And there's quite regular collaboration between those companies in going for funding or setting up projects and stuff. So, yeah, it's a really good place for us to be in.
Cool. So inevitably you answered like everybody else. It's all about collaboration and connectivity.
Sorry.
Being a large city, everybody knows everybody else and everybody's business. That's good. It means we've got some consistency between us. So Tim has asked a couple of questions around your early days, where you felt like you were beyond the curve, I guess, and about how you approached investors with your vision, and how that sort of stacked up against competitors.
Yeah, so that's a good question. We did try and be quite visionary to begin with, as a sort of imagine that things work like this rather than this. So we did try and push it a bit that way. And I'm not sure how well that went down with investors. I think maybe we were asking to take too big a leap. I mean, investors most of them didn't understand what we were talking about, to be honest, which was a bit worrying. The more positive thing was we had one or two who really did get it, but that was mainly because they spent half their time in San Francisco on the West Coast, where things like Uber and Lyft were happening. So they kind of understood it and they got it. But I think you have to, as always, shop around with your investors. You have to do research. You have to look at which ones are interested in your domain, and look at the deals they make to get a better understanding of whether they're going to actually understand what you're talking about.
And that sounds like a lot of that is around risk appetite, and where there's a well-known difference between US and European investors there. And I guess the other touching on, I know you've done lots with Innovate and similar agencies. How have you found it working with people like that?
Innovate are good. Yeah, they tend to be really good. It depends slightly on you. When you do an Innovate project, you have a monitoring officer who's your single point of contact eventually. So it somewhat depends on how useful they are, because they generally are not employed by Innovate UK. They're normally third parties, but our experience has been, on the whole, very positive. And I think as an organisation, they obviously want you to succeed. The bureaucracy side can be a little bit frustrating. It's nowhere near as bad as other grant programs, but most of it is fairly straightforward. I think changing your direction in projects is probably the most challenging aspect of that, in that they do want to be responsive and they understand that technology changes a bit, but to make a what they would call a scope change to a project can take something like 4 months to get approved. They are trying to streamline that now, though, I would say.
Yeah, and I'd imagine, particularly at the moment, there's a lot of projects that are going through scope change.
Yeah, I think they're working furiously to help out. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. That was really informative and really useful today. I know you guys are hiring at the moment. You've got some jobs out that you're looking to fill. So if anybody wants to find out a bit more about what Esoterix do and the roles that they have, please do look on their website or indeed on the TechSPARK jobs board. You know, I have to plug. And good luck. I'm sure that there will be future growth, and I think it's a really interesting time for you guys. So it's really useful and valuable that you have been able to come and talk to us today.
That's great to chat. Thanks very much for the invitation.
No worries.